Somebody call the VA. We've got a stray limping through the site. The voice cracked through the buzz of jackhammers and the thud of boots. A few workers chuckled. One of them, cigarette dangling from his lips, added, "Wrong turn to the welfare line, sweetheart." The laughter came quickly, sharp and ugly. It danced across scaffolding and bounced off steel beams. But Clara Reyes didn't pause. Her grip tightened on the olive canvas strap slung across her shoulder, her prosthetic clicking faintly with every step. She didn't look up, didn't flinch, didn't answer. They didn't know her, didn't know what her hands had carried, didn't know the weight of lives saved, didn't know that limp had come not from weakness, but from fire. And they didn't know who was watching from a black SUV parked just 2 blocks away. Before we go on, if stories of quiet bravery and dignity speak to your heart, please consider subscribing. Someone out there might need this story more than you know. The corner of East Jensen and Polk was where sidewalks cracked, weeds threaded through old brick, and Monday heat clung to the skin like judgment. On this corner, every Tuesday at exactly 11:05 a.m., Clara Reyes passed the same construction site on her way to the VA medical center. She wore the same thing, mostly. Worn jeans cut to accommodate the carbon black curve of her prosthetic, a loose olive t-shirt with faded sleeves, and scuffed brown boots that had once been military issue but now just felt like hers. Over her shoulder, a duffel, the same bag she'd carried through 2 deployments, hung light but organized. It held her pillbox, a spiral-bound notebook of to-do reminders she rarely looked at, and deep at the bottom, folded like a secret, was her old Marine Corps cap. It hadn't touched her head in over 10 years, but she never left the apartment without it. The cap had been through Fallujah and back. It had soaked up sweat, blood, dust, and the screams of orders shouted through smoke. To Clara, it wasn't a symbol. It was a scar made of fabric, and she needed it close, even if no one else understood. Her apartment was small, tucked in the back of a rust-streaked complex near a strip mall no one fixed anymore. It was quiet. That mattered. There were days she couldn't bear voices. She lived alone. Not because she wanted to, not exactly, but because silence was safer. No one asked why she froze in the cereal aisle. No one looked away awkwardly when she gripped her thigh during phantom pain. No one pitied her for a leg she didn't cry over anymore. At night, memories came like stray bullets. No warning, no logic. The heat of a sandstorm. The sudden scream of metal. The weight of someone's body, limp in her arms, ribs cracked beneath her grip. The blast. That moment of nothingness. And waking up in a hospital room with white walls too bright to be heaven and a stump where her leg used to be. She didn't talk about it. She didn't write about it. But every morning, she reached beneath the pillow, touched the tags hanging from a string around her neck, and whispered the names of 3 Marines. Just first names. That was enough. She didn't want a parade. What she wanted, what no one seemed willing to offer, was a little room to exist. To walk down a street and not be turned into someone's story. Not a punchline. Not a hero. Just Clara. She had grown up in western New Mexico, the eldest daughter in a household that believed in 2 things: work hard and don't whine. Her father fixed tractors. Her mother raised goats and 5 children with equal discipline. Clara had learned how to wrap a split hoof by 9, rewire a fence by 11, and by 15 had a grip like steel and a back that didn't bend for anyone. Joining the Marines had been the first decision she made for herself. There were no send-offs, no flag-waving goodbyes, just a long bus ride and a determination to make it out of boot camp alive. She didn't just make it, she led. Quietly, without grand speeches or showmanship. She became the kind of person who moved first, asked questions later, and kept going when others froze. But wars end, or they're supposed to. Back home, she found herself staring at job boards that asked for full mobility and team player personality. Recruiters flinched when they saw the prosthetic. Employers pretended not to notice. Or worse, they noticed too much. What if you fall on site? This job's pretty physical. We'll keep your resume on file. What none of them said aloud was what their eyes had already decided. She was a risk, not worth the paperwork, not worth the explanation to HR, so she adjusted. Found routine in stillness, developed a pattern. VA checkups on Tuesday, pharmacy on the way back, ramen and frozen green beans for dinner, same bench at the bus stop, same four walls at night. It wasn't thrilling, it wasn't tragic, it just was. But today had felt off before she even left the apartment. The sky was too white, not cloudy, just empty. The kind of sky that made shadows fall hard and sweat bead fast. She'd forgotten her notebook, realized halfway down the block. Didn't go back. Something in her gut told her, move forward. And now here she was. 11 minutes past 11, concrete blistering with heat. The sound of hammering overhead, the rattle of a nail gun, the grunt of two men heaving steel. And the voice. That voice. She didn't even see who said it, but she saw who heard it. A girl, no more than 17, holding a phone up with the bright-eyed smirk of someone filming for likes. "RoboCop," the girl mouthed to her friend. Click. Clara walked past. Click. She adjusted the strap on her bag. Click. And behind her, laughter rolled on. But someone else was watching. In the Suburban, engine idling, hands tight on the steering wheel, face stone still. And that someone had once bled on Clara's uniform. The rumble of the Suburban's engine was a low hum under the heat, blending with the city's noise. Traffic lights clicking, distant sirens, a barking dog. But inside the vehicle, everything was still. Daniel Cross hadn't moved. His elbows rested on the steering wheel, hands loose but firm, eyes locked on the woman walking down the sidewalk as if nothing had happened. As if her dignity hadn't just been dissected for sport by men who wouldn't last 5 seconds where she'd been. He'd seen the clip that morning, before it went viral. It was sent to a private group chat of former SEALs. No context. Just the video. A woman with a limp walking past a construction site. The voices, the laughter, and then the silence. Not hers, the world's. The moment she gripped that Marine cap, something inside Daniel had cracked. He hadn't seen her in years. The last time she'd been strapped to a stretcher, unconscious, her uniform half burned off, her lower leg gone, her torso soaked in blood that wasn't entirely hers. He'd never gotten to thank her. Not really. She'd pulled him from the fire when everything had gone sideways. While others ducked behind barriers, Clara had charged into chaos 3 times. The third trip, she hadn't come back whole. But he had. He'd made it home. Got the medals, the standing ovations, the job offers. She got a stump and a government-issue check. He rolled up the cuff of his left sleeve, exposing the faded trident inked just below his elbow, the lines blurred with age. The anchor, the eagle, the flint-edged spear, the mark of the Brotherhood. Daniel didn't need to ask permission. He picked up the phone and dialed a number no one used unless it mattered. When the voice answered on the other end, he simply said, "It's Cross, Houston. You know what to do." No more words. No more hesitation. He ended the call and placed the phone face down on the dash, then leaned back, hands interlocked across his stomach, and closed his eyes. Not in calm, in calculation. The convoy would be here in 12 minutes. He didn't want a scene, didn't want headlines. He wanted clarity, and he wanted it delivered directly to the face of the man who thought it was funny to humiliate someone who had once dragged 3 grown men through enemy gunfire, one of them being Daniel himself. At the construction site, the crew had mostly gone back to work, but the mood had shifted. There was a nervousness in the air, something undefined but present, like animals sensing a storm long before the clouds rolled in. The young girl, Jade, who had filmed the video, had stopped laughing. The screen in her hand still glowed, the clip now uploaded and processing. But something in her stomach had twisted. She looked up again and saw the woman she'd filmed disappear down the sidewalk. She didn't look angry. She didn't look broken. She looked still. And that was what scared Jade the most. Clara didn't know she'd been filmed, didn't know her image had already begun spreading across the internet, drawing the attention of people she'd never meet for reasons she didn't ask for. All she knew was the dust in her throat, the sun pressing down, and the feel of the curb under her boots as she waited for the walk light to change. She thought briefly of turning around, not to confront them, never that, but to make sure none of them followed. She didn't trust crowds anymore, didn't trust laughter, didn't trust the way strangers scanned her leg first before they met her eyes. But when the light flicked green, she stepped forward. Each stride clicked softly. She didn't move faster, didn't limp harder, but her shoulders straightened just slightly, her hand brushing against the marine cap inside her bag like a talisman. Behind her, tires turned the corner, a low, thunderous roll of 3 matte black SUVs, not police, not military marked, but moving with the kind of sync only one type of unit ever learned. They didn't stop at the crosswalk. They moved like shadows, 3 dark beasts prowling toward the site she'd just passed. The lead vehicle stopped exactly parallel to the main gate. The doors opened in perfect rhythm. One by one, men stepped out. 7 of them. No words, no hesitation, tactical boots, dark gray pants, black fitted shirts, close-cut hair, squared shoulders, not uniforms, but not civilian either. They didn't need flags or patches to declare who they were. Their presence said everything. Workers stopped what they were doing. The clang of a hammer, a dropped wrench, a muttered, "What the hell?" Eddie Varnell, the foreman, emerged from the site office, clipboard in hand, the brim of his cap stained with sweat. His eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize any of them. Didn't like that. "Can I help you?" he called out, voice already defensive. The tallest of the group stepped forward. Daniel Cross. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he stopped 6 feet from Eddie and said quietly but clearly, "Who humiliated Sergeant Clara Reyes this morning?" The words dropped like bricks. Eddie blinked, looked around. I don't know what you're talking about." "You will." Behind Daniel, one of the younger men pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A voice crackled to life. Eddie's voice, clear, loud, laughing. "Somebody call the VA." The sound cut. The silence that followed was suffocating. "You didn't just mock a disabled vet," Daniel said. "You mocked a decorated Marine who lost her leg pulling me out of a burning Humvee. And you did it while you were on company time, in front of a minor, and on public property." Eddie opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this is just some clip? Some joke?" He pointed down the block. She didn't turn around. She didn't yell. You know why? Because she's still carrying all of us. And we're done letting her carry that weight alone. Eddie Varnell's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. The weight of Daniel's words pressed into the air like thunderclouds gathering over dry land. He looked behind him, perhaps expecting someone, an HR rep, a supervisor, anyone with more spine than he currently had. But there was no one. Just a slowly forming semicircle of workers, most of them quiet now. Some removed their hard hats, others folded their arms, all of them watched. Daniel took another step closer. His boots crunched gravel, deliberate, steady. She never asked for medals, he said, his voice calm but flint-edged. She never asked for parades. Hell, she never even stayed for the ceremony. She just saved lives and disappeared. A pause. I should know. I was one of them. That hit. Hard. Eddie flinched like he'd been slapped. The rest of the SEALs held their formation behind Daniel. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was enough. They were the punctuation to his sentence. One of them, the youngest, tall with a tight buzz cut and squared jaw, lifted his phone. This video, he said, glancing toward the workers, has been uploaded to 3 veteran watch groups. It's already spreading. His tone wasn't vengeful. It was matter of fact, like someone reading a weather report before a tornado. And if your contractor doesn't fire you, the young SEAL added, the public will. Jade, the teenage girl who'd filmed the original clip, stood frozen on the sidewalk across the street. Her phone was down now. She wasn't filming. She couldn't. Her fingers trembled. She had posted that video to be funny. But watching it now unfold, watching grown men stand at attention for someone who hadn't even spoken back, she felt something twist in her chest. Shame. Maybe even admiration. Clara Reyes had just kept walking. She'd never looked back. And somehow, that made all of this feel heavier, realer, more permanent than a trend. Daniel turned his eyes toward the crowd. His voice changed. It wasn't cold now. It was reverent. You all saw a limp, he said, scanning the workers. But let me tell you what I saw that day in Fallujah. He paused. Just long enough. I saw a woman sprint across open ground while bullets tore the sky apart. I saw her drag a wounded medic through fire, then run back for a civilian. She went a 3rd time. For me. That blast took her leg, and she still apologized afterward for not getting back sooner. Someone among the workers whispered, Jesus. Daniel nodded. She never told anyone, never once asked for attention. So when I saw her being mocked for that limp, mocked for surviving, I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. He stepped back, but only slightly. A cue, then he turned, and he walked away. The 6 SEALs fell in behind him without needing a word. Together they crossed the gravel lot in a line, heading in the direction Clara had taken, never once looking back. Not one of them, and no one at the job site moved. Not Eddie, not the men who had laughed, not even the ones who hadn't known what to say. Because what do you say when the people you dismissed as broken turn out to be the ones who carried you all along? Clara stood at the edge of the VA Medical Center's parking lot, waiting to cross into the main lobby. She was early for her appointment, but not early enough to avoid the lunchtime crowd. A couple of young interns in scrubs chatted near the front steps, their voices low, eyes flicking over her and then back to their phones. She didn't care, didn't need their acknowledgement. Not today. But something behind her made her pause. Footsteps, 7 of them. Not fast, not rushed, purposeful. She turned slowly and froze. Daniel Cross approached, flanked by 6 men she didn't recognize but knew instantly. You don't need names to recognize brotherhood. You feel it, like gravity. He didn't speak right away. Didn't need to. Their presence said what words couldn't. When he stopped a few feet from her, his hands were at his sides, his gaze steady. "Permission to honor you, ma'am," he said. The words punched the air out of her. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came. Daniel raised his hand in a perfect salute. Crisp, square, deliberate. And in one seamless movement, the rest of the SEALs followed. A line of men, rigid in posture, eyes forward, chests squared, held their salute. To her, to Clara. Her throat tightened. Her fingers tingled. The wind picked up slightly, lifting the hem of her t-shirt, brushing the frayed edge of her bag. And then, after years of never saluting anyone, not since the blast, not since the pain, not since being discarded like she was too much trouble to hire, she raised her hand. Muscle memory guided her. Her spine straightened. Her hand found her brow. She returned the salute, and something in her chest unlocked. Daniel lowered his hand, then stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver coin, worn at the edges, engraved with a trident, an anchor, and the words, "Only earned, never given." He placed it in Clara's palm and gently folded her fingers around it. "You earned this," he said, 15 years ago, but you were too busy saving lives to receive it." She stared down at the coin, then up at him. She tried to speak, but tears came faster than words, so she nodded. Once, the kind of nod that says, "I remember, and thank you." The 7 men turned and left. Clara remained, holding the coin like something sacred. For the first time in years, her limp felt lighter, because it wasn't carrying silence anymore. It was carrying memory. And memory finally had a witness. The next morning, Clara sat at her kitchen table with a mug of black coffee going cold in her hands. The coin rested in front of her. She hadn't put it away. Couldn't. It caught the morning light, casting a sharp glint on the old wood surface. She'd barely slept, not because of pain, she was used to that, but because something had shifted. Not just in her, outside her. She had become visible. It was a feeling she hadn't let herself hope for in years. The internet, however, wasn't sleeping. The video Jade had filmed, the original one with Eddie's jeering voice and Clara's silent walk, had already reached 250,000 views by sunrise. But now it had been stitched with a new clip. Someone from the site, no one had claimed it, had filmed the SEALs' confrontation. And then the salute, the full arc. Mockery, revelation, reckoning, honor. People didn't scroll past that kind of ending. It wasn't just content, it was conscience. Veteran groups shared it. Military wives forums reposted it. Then teachers, then moms. Then strangers who had never served but knew shame when they saw it, and grace when it stood silent and straight-backed in the Texas sun. The contractor overseeing the construction site released a formal apology by noon. They didn't name names, but everyone knew. Eddie Varnell had been reassigned indefinitely, though rumors swirled he'd been quietly let go. An internal audit of workplace conduct was announced, as well as a new training program titled Respect in the Trades. Clara hadn't spoken to the press, hadn't responded to requests for interviews. She didn't want to be anyone's headline. But life, it turned out, doesn't wait for permission. The invitation came 3 days later, tucked inside a plain envelope with a Roosevelt High School letterhead. Veterans Appreciation Week. We'd be honored to have you speak. Clara stared at it for hours before answering. She wasn't a speaker, She'd spent most of her adult life learning how to disappear in plain sight. What could she say to a room full of teenagers, kids who'd never seen war, never pulled bloodied fabric from shrapnel wounds, never tasted metal when memories punched through a dream? But something about the wording caught her. We'd be honored. That word. Not grateful. Not impressed. Not curious. Honored. Clara thought of Leo, the little boy who lived in her apartment complex. He had a prosthetic arm and an obsession with spaceships. He waved at her every Thursday from the mailbox, grinning like her limp was something magic. The world might not need another speech, but maybe it needed him to hear her voice. So she said yes. The auditorium was fuller than she expected. Rows of students fidgeted in seats. Some whispered. A few stared at their phones. But when Clara stepped onto the stage, hair tied back, shoulders squared, marine cap in hand, something shifted. She walked without hurry, without apology. Each step echoed with that soft, mechanical click. Click, click, click. She stopped at the podium. She didn't clear her throat, didn't shuffle papers. She just looked out across the room and began. I used to think scars were something you had to hide, she said. Her voice was low, steady. That if people saw them, they'd only see the damage, not the story behind them. Silence. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just stillness. I lost my leg in Fallujah, she continued, but I gained something more important. I learned that pain doesn't make you broken. It proves you lived through something that tried to break you and failed. She paused. Some students looked down, others looked up. All of them listened. Scars aren't shame, Clara said. They're chapters, and we don't get to skip the hard ones if we want to be whole. She looked to the front row, where Leo sat beside his mother, legs dangling, his red hoodie pulled over his elbow. In his lap, he clutched the challenge coin Daniel had given her, the one she'd passed on to him that morning in a quiet gesture neither of them needed to explain. Clara smiled. Courage doesn't always roar, she said. Sometimes it limps, and sometimes it shows up wearing a red hoodie and holding its head high. Leo beamed, his mother cried, and the students rose, first in ones and twos, then in waves, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Not for a hero, but for someone who had stopped walking in silence. Back at the job site, change came not with noise, but with a single brick. Set near the front gate, embedded in polished concrete, it bore a simple engraving, SGT, Clara Reyes, built on respect. There were no flowers, no spotlight, just footsteps, dozens of them, passing each morning. Some paused, some touched the brick. A few whispered a thank you. No ceremony was needed. The honor was already built in. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected began to ripple outward. Not from the media, not from politicians or talking heads, but from the people. It started small. A few construction crews in nearby districts requested the new Respect in the Trades workshops be expanded to them. At first, the company assumed it was damage control, optics. But then the requests kept coming, from men who'd never served, from supervisors who admitted they'd looked the other way, from workers who said nothing that day, but hadn't been able to sleep since. The first workshop was quiet, uncomfortable, rough hands, hard eyes, arms crossed. Then a veteran named Miguel stood up, 61 years old, worn denim and a marine tattoo just visible beneath his sleeve. He spoke softly about his brother, also a disabled vet, who'd been turned away from job after job because no one wanted to deal with the liability. He didn't raise his voice, but by the end of it, No one was crossing their arms anymore. By the fifth session, something cracked open. Stories poured out. Not just of disrespect given, but of silence kept. Men admitting the jokes they'd let slide, the bullies they'd laughed with, the moments they could have spoken but didn't. And it turned out, shame could be heavy, but it didn't have to be permanent. Clara Reyes didn't follow the coverage. She didn't need to. What mattered came in smaller moments. An elderly woman who stopped her on the street to say, "My son served too. Thank you." A cashier who offered to help her bag groceries, not with pity, but with quiet acknowledgement. A neighbor who brought her a cup of coffee and said, "I watched the video. You made me want to do better." She didn't ask to become a symbol. She never wanted that. But the world has a way of turning scars into banners when we finally decide to look, really look, at the people we've overlooked. One afternoon, Clara sat on a bench near a small cafe 2 blocks from the job site. The brick bearing her name was now part of the landscape. Nothing flashy, but visible enough that it couldn't be ignored. As she sipped her coffee, a shadow approached. Leo. He stood beside the bench, his red hoodie slightly oversized, the sleeve of his prosthetic arm pushed up to the elbow. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at her with that same wide-eyed steadiness she was beginning to recognize in herself. Then softly, he asked, "Do you think I could be a Marine too?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at the boy, really looked, at the arm, at the weight he carried in silence, at the questions behind his eyes. She leaned forward. "You already are," she said. "Every day you wake up and keep going. That's what Marines do." Leo grinned, the kind that crinkled his whole face. Then, without hesitation, he slid into the seat beside her. The two sat in silence, watching the sidewalk bustle. A few people passed by, eyes flicking toward Clara, some nodding in recognition. Others just walked on. But Clara didn't mind. She had spent years trying not to be seen. Now she'd earned the right to be remembered. 6 months later, she stood backstage at the National Veterans Conference in Washington, D.C. The lights were hot. Her hands, for once, were ungloved. She could hear the crowd murmuring beyond the curtain. Military families, active duty personnel, veterans young and old, government officials. Some had flown cross-country to be here. She hadn't rehearsed a speech. She'd refused a teleprompter, because what she had to say didn't need polish. It needed truth. A stagehand gave her the signal. She stepped forward. The applause began before she reached the podium. A standing ovation. Not for fame, not for fame's sake, but for recognition, for the story they all now knew. In the front row, she spotted 2 familiar faces. Daniel Cross, in dress uniform, sitting with arms folded respectfully, and Leo, in a tiny Marine Corps jacket his mother had stitched by hand. The boy's small hand rested protectively over the coin Clara had once been given, now his, polished to a mirror shine. Clara took a breath and began. "I used to think honor came with medals," she said, "or ranks, or salutes." She looked around the room. "But I've learned that honor comes when you keep walking after the world tells you to sit down, when you don't shout, but stand, when your scars speak louder than your voice ever could." She paused. Let it breathe. Some of us come home whole. Some of us don't. Some wounds heal, others don't, and some just become part of who we are. She glanced at Leo. Courage isn't loud. It's not shiny. It doesn't demand attention. Sometimes it limps. Sometimes it shakes. And sometimes it wears a red hoodie and carries hope in its pocket. There was a long silence. Then the applause came. This time, Clara didn't back away. She stood in it, owned it. Not for what she lost, but for what she never gave up. The brick at the job site became something of a quiet destination. Veterans from across the state, and eventually the country, made detours to see it. Some came on motorcycles, patched jackets flapping in the wind. Others arrived in silence, with canes, braces, or old pain stitched into their bodies. They didn't come to worship. They came to remember. Because Clara's story wasn't just hers, it was theirs. And that brick didn't just hold her name. It held a question for every pair of boots that passed it. Will you speak up next time? From that moment, from one cruel joke turned into a national reckoning, a movement began. It wasn't viral anymore. It was personal. The same teenager who had once uploaded the video out of mockery now posted something new. Let respect be louder than laughter. The hashtag spread. People shared their own scars. Veterans, nurses, cancer survivors, amputees, mothers, grandfathers, students, firefighters. They didn't want sympathy. They wanted space. To be seen. To be heard. To be human. At the end of her keynote, Clara closed with this. Scars aren't shame. They're proof you survived. And every day you keep walking, even when they laugh, even when they look away, you become someone worth remembering. She stepped back from the mic. Not to exit, but to share the light. Because Clara Reyes had once walked alone. Now she walked with thousands, and in every step, her limp wasn't a burden. It was a banner, a story, a start. Have you ever seen someone mocked for their difference and wished you'd spoken up? What does real honor look like in your community today? If Clara's story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it forward and subscribe for more true stories that remind us. Dignity is not something people earn. It's something we owe each other. Because sometimes the smallest gestures, a salute, a coin, a single brick, can rebuild more than walls. They can rebuild us. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.